Okay, so the final paper of this first session is by Anjalie Dalal-Clayton, called BlackSkin, Bluecoat, Revelations from the Archive. Anjalie is going to focus, I think, on the exhibition context of some of the work that produced at that time. Anjalie is a doctoral researcher at Liverpool John Moores University, working with the Bluecoat, and her research looks at current practices of exhibiting Black British artists in museums. So, Anjalie, would you like to come and give your presentation, please? Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, can you all hear me all right? Yeah? Yes. Okay, so thanks for having me. And I'm going to read from my paper instead of trying to freestyle it. So, I've been working on a collaborative research project with the Bluecoat in Liverpool for the past 3 years, which examines its history of exhibiting work by and the nature of its engagement with Black British artists. My research has naturally led me to investigate the circumstances surrounding the curation and reception of the 1985 exhibition BlackSkin, Bluecoat, which showed work by Sonia Boyce, Eddie Chambers, Tam Joseph, and Keith Piper. Through a discussion of a record of unpublished correspondence between the 4 artists and the artistic director Brian Biggs, I hope to show how the relationships that were developed through the curation of this exhibition came to make a lasting impact on the Bluecoat's programme. In late 1983, the Bluecoat received a letter from Eddie Chambers in which he introduced the Blk Art Group and requested an exhibition. Biggs asked for more information, and Chambers replied with CVs of the members of the Blk Art Group, whom he listed as himself, Keith Piper, Marlene Smith, and Donald Rodney. Biggs then wrote back, promising that Chambers' ideas would be considered at the next gallery committee meeting in early 1984. And there's no record of what the committee actually thought of Chambers' proposal, but it was rejected on grounds that financial provision had not been secured for the forthcoming 1985 programme. Only 4 months later, however, Biggs then wrote to Keith Piper, asking if they might meet to discuss the possibility of an exhibition on black art that could be shown at the Bluecoat in the spring of 1985. What had happened in this short period to change Biggs's mind about doing a show on black art? Had the Bluecoat suddenly secured funds for its future programme? This is possible, but the fact that gaps in the 1984 programme were filled by other exhibition proposals that were received at around the same time as Chambers suggests not. Perhaps Chambers' proposal hadn't been convincing enough. Indeed, Biggs's recollection is that Chambers had requested a solo show and that the gallery committee felt his works were not yet strong enough to justify it. However, the records indicate that, on the contrary, Chambers had proposed a group show. In that brief period, between rejecting Chambers' proposal and contacting Piper, Biggs had seen the exhibition Black Art Now at the Black Art Gallery in London. The show had made a strong impact on him and prompted him to organise something along similar lines at the Bluecoat. And whilst waiting for a reply from Piper, he also saw Into the Open at the Mappin Gallery in Sheffield, which equally inspired him. I suggest, therefore, that it was these other exhibitions that piqued Biggs's interest in the work of the members of the Blk Art Group and their contemporaries. The Bluecoat had, of course, shown work by Black British artists before. They'd shown work by black artists before, and there'd been an exhibition of prints by Bruce Honour-Brack-Payer in 1972, and a couple of shows of contemporary African art in the 1960s and 70s, for example. But that some of the artists in them, such as Ronald Moody, were not African, however, highlights the fact that before the 1980s, most British art galleries would categorise black artists as African or Caribbean, regardless of whether they had been born in or had been resident in Britain for a significant amount of time. In fact, it was only upon receiving that first letter from Chambers that Biggs became aware of the notion of a black British artist, and by that I mean both British artists with Caribbean or African ancestry, or indeed black artists as they were conceived by the Blk Art Group. But it seems the introduction of this idea within Chambers' proposal hadn't been enough to interest or convince Biggs to pursue it. I argue that it was upon seeing the work in Black Art Now and Into the Open that his mind was changed. The large group show format of these exhibitions seemed to give proof of an emerging movement centred on the notion of Black British art. But the novelty of this idea was not the only factor. The collapse of industry, unemployment, the rise of the far right and racial tension that for many characterised early 1980s Britain was just as significant a factor in his attraction to the work, if not more so. He recalls it being an acutely politicised period and that tensions were still incredibly raw in Liverpool in the aftermath of the Toxteth riots. So on encountering the work in these exhibitions, Biggs recalls being struck by the way the content of the work resonated with the times. He felt that it had a vitality, a currency, and an urgency that needed to be seen at the Bluecoat. So it seems it was a combination of factors that provoked Biggs's interest in the work. First, it was actually seeing the work of some of the artists that Chambers had proposed in other exhibitions. Second, it was the stamp of approval given to their work as a result of being shown in those galleries. Third, it was the sense of there being a new movement that resulted from the large group show format of those shows. Fourth, it was the novelty of the notion of the Black British artist. And most importantly, it was the relevancy of the content of the work to the socio-political milieu. It's worth reflecting on this for a moment before going on to talk about how the exhibition BlackSkin Bluecoat then came about. For Biggs, and presumably for many others, the work of these young artists seemed current because much of its content related to current affairs, specifically racial conflict, violence and exclusion. But to what extent did Biggs, and indeed other curators and gallery directors, consider the work as being current in terms of debates about art? The work of the artists of the Blk Art Group, for example, with its melding of politics and aesthetics as part of a rejection of the modernist idea of art for art's sake, could have been understood as congruent with the modernist avant-garde and the work of groups such as Art and Language, who questioned the normative claims made in high modernism about art's autonomy. However, a contextualisation of this sort wasn't made in the curation of BlackSkin Bluecoat, and not, as far as I'm aware, in other exhibitions of the period that were similar. Why were curators and critics not able to identify the work of the Blk Art Group and their contemporaries with the avant-garde, and were instead looking to discourses outside of art for reasons to champion their work? Why was the work of these artists not made sense of as part of an ongoing history of art? And this is something that Kabina touched on earlier and perhaps something we can discuss later. So as I was saying, having been much inspired by Into the Open and Black Art Now, Biggs wrote to Piper again, expressing his increasing eagerness to show Piper's work as part of a group exhibition that might include some of the artists he'd seen in Sheffield. And Piper's response was, "I was interested by your suggestion for organising a show along the lines of Into the Open. As an individual who's been committed to collective activity amongst like-minded black artists through my activities with the Blk Art Group, I'm very sympathetic to such a project. However, I feel, and I'm sure you'll agree with me on this, that there's limited mileage in collectivising and exhibiting the work of individuals linked by no other factor beyond the colour of their skin. If Into the Open is to be seen, as it is, an important first step, then once in the open, individual black artists should be given access to the type of total control of a given exhibition space enjoyed by many of their white contemporaries. I do not feel that it should be out of the question for black artists of the obvious strength and quality of many of the contributors to Into the Open, i.e. Sonia Boyce, Tom Joseph, etc., to all be offered solo shows both at your gallery and elsewhere, in a deliberate and systematic campaign to redress the balance of decades of exclusion from the gallery system which many worthy black artists have suffered. I hope that all of this is not too off-putting, but I really feel that development at this point is imperative." This argument will be familiar to everyone here as one of a number of defining concerns of the Blk Art Group, and one that became a key focus for debate during the period that's now known as the Black Art Movement. More specifically, it indicates that artists of the Blk Art Group and their contemporaries, by this point having exhibited in a number of group shows, felt that they and their work had been sufficiently introduced to the gallery-going public and were therefore keen to have their work engaged with more deeply via one-person shows. For Biggs, an exhibition of a similar size at the Bluecoat would have been tempting. However, the Bluecoat did not have the space nor the resources to stage a show of that size. Moreover, Biggs had inherited a set of institutional practices in which one-person shows were reserved for more established artists whose quantity of works would not only fill the entire gallery space, but for whose work there was also likely to be an existing discourse to justify it. Therefore, Biggs replied by saying, "I agree with your suggestion that, rather than repeat at the Bluecoat a group show similar to Into the Open, with a large number of artists each represented by a small number of works, artists be invited to show individually. The nature of our practice here makes it possible to feature in one exhibition a more substantial body of work by a number of artists, displayed separately in each of the 4 rooms." And then he says, "It would therefore be possible to show you, Tom Joseph, Sonia Boyce, and perhaps another artist, all at the same time." For Biggs, this format was favourable in a number of ways. Firstly, showing 4 artists would allow him to fill the entire gallery space with works, which he felt wouldn't have been possible if he only showed 1 artist. Secondly, showing the artists in separate rooms would allow for a greater appreciation of their individual practices, thereby offering a response to the challenge presented by Into the Open, that is, engaging with the work on a deeper level now that the artists were in the open. Thirdly, showing more than 1 artist would enable a dialogue to develop between the artists' work, an issue that Biggs was concerned about, given that these artists had either only just graduated from or were still at art school. Unfortunately, the record doesn't show what Piper's response was. Presumably the discussion continued by phone, and the format proposed by Biggs was agreed to, as the subsequent letter was an invitation to Chambers to be the 4th artist in the show. There's no record of what the final configuration of the exhibition was, but to Biggs's recollection, and perhaps the 2 artists here can help me fill in the gaps, but to his recollection, Gallery 1 showed Boyce's works, which were Auntie Enid, which you can see on the left, Missionary Position 2, Position Changing, and Big Women's Talk, which are on the right, and also Missionary Position 1, Lay Back, and Slow Hand, which I don't have images for. Also in Gallery 1 was Piper's The 7 Rages of Man, which you can see on the left. Biggs's plan to have each artist show separately in their own room didn't quite become a reality. Piper's other work was a slide projection and needed to be shown alone in a darkened gallery space. This meant that Piper and Boyce had to share Gallery 1, therefore putting the exhibition at risk of echoing shows such as Into the Open, even if only to a very small extent. So Piper's slide-based work, The Trophies of Empire, which you can see on the right, and which is not to be confused with an exhibition of the same title, which he organised some years later, was shown in Gallery 2. In Gallery 3, there were works by Tam Joseph. On the left, you can see The 14th Victim. In the middle is UK School Reports. And I'm not certain about the work on the right, but I think it's called In the Interest of State Security, if anyone remembers or knows. So that's that one. Also on show in that room were Monkey They Chop, Baboon They Cry, which you can see on the left, and Spirit of the Carnival, which is on the right. And I don't have images for the other works by Joseph, but they included Has Anybody Seen Tony Birbeck, I Imagine I Hear Music, Icarus, and Hey, Who Are You? And finally, in Gallery 4 was Chambers' Alabama Night Moves, The Marlborough Connection. The title for the exhibition seemed to be a reference to Fanon's seminal text, BlackSkin, White Masks. However, Boyce recently explained that it was more of an allusion to the issue of black artists having, or indeed not having, access to and representation by institutional spaces. Interestingly, this issue was reflected in the visitor responses, with some commenting, for example, that they hadn't known about the work before and that the exhibition had opened their eyes to it. The amalgamation of politics with aesthetics that seemed to be inherent in the work didn't go unnoticed by visitors either. One noted the political aesthetic and stated they liked it. Another expressed that it was one of the few times the Bluecoat had real art about real people. And another said that it was good to see some art with meaning and not just a load of shit on canvases. In terms of the overall critical reception of the work of the Blk Art Group and their contemporaries, the political content was often such a focus that style and practice were overlooked, as we've already heard today. and hopefully this afternoon's papers will assist in restoring a balance in this respect. But I also think that what may also be needed is an account of how the dominant terms of evaluation for this art were based on drawing such a bold line between politics and aesthetics in the first place. A catalogue for BlackSkin Bluecoat wasn't produced. However, Chambers wrote the text for an accompanying leaflet that would make clear the premise for the show. Although the Blk Art Group had more or less disbanded by this time, the text indicated that its objectives were at the heart of this exhibition. Chambers asserted that the artists wanted their work to contribute to the vital process of consciousness raising and politicisation of black people, and that the exhibition was an attempt to establish a positive and mutually beneficial dialogue between Liverpool's black communities and one of the city's most important gallery spaces. For although the artists were based in London and Bristol, the problems of racism and oppression provided a common bond between themselves and black Liverpudlians. This was significant because it marked the first time a politically defined notion of black art was being presented at the Bluecoat. As Biggs explained in a recent discussion with me, black artists before the Blk Art Group were not really understood as being part of a political movement, they were just artists. The premise, therefore, prompted the Bluecoat to attempt its first dialogue with the local black community. Indeed, there were a number of responses in the visitors' book that expressed that an exhibition like this was long overdue at the Bluecoat, and suggested that the exhibition would be well received by local black audiences. However, a seminar that was held towards the end of the exhibition's 4-week run would prove otherwise. Biggs recalls that the audience, the majority of whom were black artists from the Liverpool area, were rather antagonistic and offended that the Bluecoat's first major attempt to engage with black artists should be with artists based in London and Bristol, but not Liverpool. Biggs had suggested that their hostility was due to the fact that the black community in Liverpool sees itself as distinct because its roots in the city are traceable to at least the 1700s, and he recalls the BlackSkin Bluecoat artists being surprised by their response. Indeed, the lack of solidarity expressed by the black Liverpudlians at this event presented a challenge to the idea of black art as the members of the Blk Art Group had envisaged it. But despite this particular reaction, BlackSkin Bluecoat was one of the most important exhibitions in the Bluecoat's history because it initiated, in 2 ways, an increasing engagement with black artists and artists of other minority backgrounds at the Bluecoat in the following years. Firstly, it signalled to other black artists that the Bluecoat was worth approaching with their exhibition proposals. One of the reasons why exhibitions showing work by black artists had been so infrequent at the gallery prior to BlackSkin Bluecoat was because to show them, Biggs had to first come across them. Until the late 1980s, when public funds began to be handed out with the proviso that there should be some engagement with black artists, the Bluecoat generally relied on artists' proposals to come in to build its programme, because it wasn't always possible for Biggs to make visits to other galleries and studios where he might encounter artists who wouldn't think to or wouldn't have the confidence to submit a proposal. This approach to programming had undoubtedly limited the diversity of artists shown at the Bluecoat. In Biggs's words, after BlackSkin Bluecoat, it was like the floodgates were open, and you can see that in the list of shows that we did. And obviously I can't list them all for you now, but they included small group shows such as Intimate Distance, which featured work by Mona Hatoum, Zarina Bimji, Ingrid Pollard, Maxine Walker and Shutapa Biswas. Also approaches to realism, which included Rashid Areen and Sonia Boyce. And there were also one-person shows for artists such as Gavin Yantjes, Sakari Douglas Camp, Maud Salter and Leslie Sanderson. In fact, Biggs has told me that the frequency of exhibitions showing work by black artists was such that the Bluecoat was, from time to time, criticised for not giving equal representation to white artists. The second way in which BlackSkin Bluecoat initiated an increasing engagement with black artists at the Bluecoat was through the relationships it enabled the gallery to build with the artists in that show, particularly Chambers and Piper, and more recently Boyce. Chambers subsequently took his touring exhibition, Black Art Plotting the Course, there in 1989, and let the canvas come to life with Dark Faces in 1990. And in doing so, he established what would now be called a co-curatorial relationship with Biggs. A few years later, Piper approached the gallery about researching slave histories in Liverpool, which led to the Bluecoat commissioning him to curate the exhibition Trophies of Empire. In both cases, the Bluecoat's relationship with the artist was highly collaborative. Biggs took part in selecting artworks, but his choices were very much informed by artist recommendations and his ongoing dialogue with them. This approach to curating is fairly standard now, but it was highly significant at the time, when working with and showing the work of Black British artists was new territory for galleries like the Bluecoat. Through necessity, Biggs relied on Piper and Chambers to make suggestions about the content and format of those shows, and their working style became more relaxed and nuanced in the process. It enabled them to produce exhibitions that moved beyond the artist's ethnicity and were instead based on themes that would offer a deeper engagement in the content and practice of the work. Trophies of Empire, for example, dealt with race as one amongst a number of concepts, but proposals were welcomed from any artist regardless of their ethnicity. Consequently, Trophies of Empire was a significant exhibition for the gallery as BlackSkin Bluecoat, because it demonstrated the trajectory it had taken since the early 1980s in terms of how it engaged with black artists, that is, showing the work of black artists without ethnicity being the defining category for their selection. The case of BlackSkin Bluecoat demonstrates the great necessity of the work of the Blk Art Group and their contemporaries in raising awareness of the existence of black British artists, the value of those first few group shows or survey shows of the early 1980s in piquing the interest of some curators and directors at other galleries around the country, and moreover, the importance of the relationships that developed between the artists and galleries as a result of those exhibitions. In the case of the Bluecoat, its location outside the dominant arts centre of London allowed it to take risks by establishing co-curatorial relationships with emerging artists. Those relationships then enabled more exhibitions to come to fruition that would not only include work by black British artists, but would enable a more thoughtful approach to curating and critically framing their work. Of course, the issue of black artists being pigeonholed in ethnically themed exhibitions continues to arise, and even recent exhibitions such as Afro Modern could be accused of not quite managing to break the mould of the Black Survey show. However, the case of BlackSkin Bluecoat suggests that the maintenance and nurturing of relationships between galleries and artists can make an incremental yet lasting impact on the kinds of exhibitions that are produced. Thanks.
Thank you, Anjalie. And I have to say, I've chaired quite a few conferences in my time, and I've given papers at conferences all over the place. But I have to say, the quality of the papers this morning is absolutely outstanding. I'm sure I don't know if you agree with me on that, but every paper has been superb, and yours absolutely too. Lots of questions, I'm sure. We've got about 10 minutes or so before we go for lunch. I think I'll just kick off, Anjalie, because I think the value of your research, or part of the value of research, is this kind of is the contribution to this area of developing exhibition histories, which within art history and curatorial studies is quite a new thing. And many of the exhibition histories I've read have not covered, for example, this particular period and the artists that you're looking at. So I think from that alone, it's a really great contribution. But also, I think you forensically kind of show the impact that an exhibition has on audiences and how people react at the time. The reaction of artists in Liverpool, which really kind of, again, is a very familiar theme that is really important to bring up, and it gets lost often in mainstream art histories. So I wanted to say that I think that was really very valuable on that. Are there any questions that flow from the presentation? Kwon, just up.
Thank you. I'm Kwon Lee. Great presentation, thank you. I just want to ask the views of the local black artists. Have you had a chance to follow that up to what they think now? Because in retrospect, like in hindsight, there's sort of interesting views today on what we thought back in '82. Well, I wasn't really engaged with it back then, but I just wonder what, is your study of a broader retrospective look as well as kind of following up that trajectory now, I guess?
Well, I've been trying to get in touch with some of the members of some of the people who attended that seminar, because it was mostly attended by, I think, a group called LARCA, which I think was the Liverpool Anti-Racist Cultural association or something, some kind of thing like that. And I know the guy who ran that group is still somewhere around Liverpool and still doing things, although he kind of cut off ties with the Bluecoat at some point in the 90s, I think. So trying to get hold of people has been quite hard, and I've been in touch with the council there, because there used to be a Black Arts unit in the Liverpool Council, and I think some of those people were working there, but I haven't been able to get in touch with anyone yet, so the research goes on. But there's actually that's actually just an anecdote from Biggs, and I can sort of verify it through looking at some of the press responses that kind of noted it, but I actually don't have any evidence to prove that actually happened. But I don't know if you can remember, Sonia or Keith, wherever you are. Can you remember it? No. I think it's scarred on Brian's mind forever. I think he was, yeah. Anyway.
Okay, we take two questions, one from Jenny and one from Levana, please. Hold on, Jenny, could you wait for the mic?
I'm Jenny Boyce. There was a Caribbean Centre in Liverpool, and there are lots of people that go back a long time, and there's loads of people there you can talk to.
Great.
Just walk out of the city and
Down the road.
if you call out, you'll find them. And there's loads of stuff there, so it's all there.
Okay, thank you.
Levana, just in the row above, thanks.
I do think it's quite significant, actually, that you can't necessarily find those people, because the point is that they're not associated with the Bluecoat. So however many shows they put on, then whatever should have happened didn't develop any kind of visibility for artists working in the region. And I think that happens across that region. I wonder about this, what you think about the catalogue. What you think about how important is it that there wasn't a catalogue? Generally speaking, whether you think the catalogue is an important sort of thing. I know you do as an art historian, but I mean, what do you think about that? What did you say to Brian?
Well, yeah, as an art historian, it feels like a travesty that there wasn't a catalogue for that show, but I know that resources were limited, and I know that they didn't regularly produce catalogues for their exhibitions at that time, and the exhibitions were very short, often 3 or 4 weeks long. So I don't think they ever had the budget to produce anything like that. But
it just seems odd that some of us and some of the artists here that were working on no budgets, but pieces of paper and what used to be before photocopiers, which I choose not to remember what they were called. Managed to produce catalogues. So,
yeah,
the money thing is not famous.
I don't really have an answer to that, although it's, I think the leaflet was pretty good. I don't know if you saw it. It had some images and quite a substantial text for a leaflet. But yeah, disappointing that there's like almost no slides from the show. You can't find images of the works that were in it. It's difficult.
That's one of the value, I think, of exhibition histories, because that exhibitions are obviously so ephemeral, and often those things are lost.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to kind of revisit that and retrace those kinds of lost histories.
But just to echo what somebody was saying before about people's personal archives, have just got to be brought out and shared, and I hope that the Blk Art Group research project will help to bring that all together in some way.
Okay, one more quick question from Linda, just over there.
It's really threading throughout the morning from the first paper onwards, and that is this whole issues around family. I was very struck by Sonia's 2 paintings that were shown here this morning on Enid and listening to Big Women's talk. I'm working, curating with Vanley Burke, the photography show at the MAC. It struck me very
Which we'll see
strongly
tonight, by the way.
that I had a remaining layer of prejudice, which was the whole sense of black artists in Britain having lost their culture traditionally with slavery, and that image that we constantly see illustrated of the slave ships with everybody lined up kind of ignores the sort of sense of the way in which family is so important, even if you haven't got a mother, you know, there's no father around. That sense of listening to the stories. And I feel more and more, and I think it's really important to all of us in education, is that it's not really the theory and the education that is influencing us. We go back time and time again to those stories that we listen to between our mothers and our aunties, and that in a sense our culture comes out of that. And
Is there a question, Linda? Sorry.
yeah, well, no. It was
Okay. Oh, okay. Can we then sort of wind up, because we're running out of time now? But thank you for the comment. I really appreciate that. Sorry to be brutal, but we are kind of really running over time. Thanks again to Anjalie for her paper. Marlene is now going to tell us where to go for lunch, and then I'd like to come back. If we can reconvene at 2:30 sharp.